The first organized transport of German prisoners of war to the United States departed from North African ports in late 1943. Following the collapse of Axis forces in Tunisia that May, Allied commanders faced an immediate logistical problem. Hundreds of thousands of German and Italian soldiers had surrendered, overwhelming detention facilities in North Africa and creating security concerns in the Mediterranean theater. The decision to transfer large numbers of these prisoners across the Atlantic represented a significant shift in Allied prisoner management strategy. The typical journey began at staging camps near Casablanca or Oran, where prisoners underwent initial processing. Guards recorded names, ranks, and units before assigning prisoners to transport groups. The German soldiers, many still wearing the desert-worn uniforms of the Afrika Korps, boarded Liberty ships or converted passenger vessels for the Atlantic crossing. The voyage lasted between 10 and 14 days, depending on convoy speed and routing. Onboard conditions varied by vessel. Prisoners slept in holds fitted with tiered bunks, typically stacked 3 or 4 high. Rations consisted of bread, canned meat, and soup distributed twice daily. Medical officers conducted daily inspections for contagious diseases. Guards maintained strict separation between officers and enlisted men, following Geneva Convention protocols. Few prisoners spoke English, and interpreters moved between decks to relay orders and answer questions. Map: Atlantic convoy routes. As ships approached American ports, many prisoners recorded their first impressions in letters and diaries later examined by camp authorities. The sight of undamaged cities surprised those who had heard reports of American industrial vulnerability. New York's skyline, Boston's harbor installations, and Norfolk's naval yards contradicted expectations formed by German propaganda. One sergeant from the 15th Panzer Division noted that he had expected to see signs of hardship similar to those in German cities, but instead observed busy ports and well-maintained facilities. From Atlantic ports, prisoners traveled by rail to camps scattered across the United States. The War Department had identified suitable locations primarily in southern and western states where climate permitted year-round outdoor work and construction costs remained low. Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and the Carolinas hosted major base camps, each designed to hold between 3,000 and 5,000 prisoners. Smaller branch camps, often located near agricultural areas or military installations, held between 200 and 500 men. The train journey itself provided prisoners with their most extensive view of American territory. Guards kept windows accessible, and prisoners observed farmland, industrial centers, and small towns during trips that sometimes lasted 3 or 4 days. The abundance of automobiles, the size of agricultural machinery, and the apparent prosperity of rural areas registered strongly in prisoner accounts. A corporal transported to Camp Hearn in Texas wrote that he had traveled through more undamaged countryside in 2 days than existed in all of Western Germany. Upon arrival at base camps, prisoners underwent formal processing. Camp administrators photographed each man, recorded detailed personal information, and assigned identification numbers. Medical staff conducted physical examinations and documented any injuries or chronic conditions. Officers received separate quarters in accordance with Geneva Convention requirements that prohibited compelling officers to perform labor. Enlisted men and non-commissioned officers were assigned to barracks and informed of camp regulations through interpreters. The physical layout of American POW camps followed standardized plans developed by the War Department. Perimeter fences, typically double rows of barbed wire separated by a 10-foot gap, enclosed rectangular compounds. Guard towers positioned at corners and intervals provided observation points. Inside the fence line, wooden barracks built to temporary military specifications housed prisoners in open bay arrangements. Each barracks contained between 60 and 80 bunks, coal-burning stoves for heating, and basic washing facilities. Mess halls, infirmaries, recreation buildings, and administrative structures completed the camp infrastructure. Daily routines began with morning roll call conducted at 6 o'clock. Prisoners formed by barracks while American guards counted and inspected the formations. After roll call, enlisted prisoners assigned to work details departed for their labor sites. Officers and men excused from work for medical reasons remained in camp. The midday meal, served between 11 and 1 o'clock, provided the day's main break. Work details returned to camp between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. Evening roll call preceded the distribution of dinner. Lights remained on in barracks until 9:30, after which guards enforced quiet hours. Food provided to German prisoners followed American military ration standards as specified by the Geneva Convention requirement that prisoners receive the same provisions as depot troops of the detaining power. Camp kitchens served meals that included meat, potatoes, bread, vegetables, and coffee. Weekly menus rotated to provide variety. Prisoners received approximately 3,500 calories daily, comparable to American soldiers stationed in the United States. Many prisoners noted this represented more abundant food than they had received in Wehrmacht units during the final years of the war. Bread portions particularly impressed men who had experienced rationing in Germany. Camp authorities permitted prisoners to receive food parcels from the International Red Cross, and these packages containing chocolate, cigarettes, and canned goods supplemented official rations. Medical care in the camps operated under American military medical personnel, with assistance from German medical officers who were prisoners themselves. Each base camp maintained an infirmary staff to handle routine ailments, injuries, and sick call. Serious cases requiring surgery or extended treatment were transferred to designated prisoner hospitals. Treatment standards matched those provided to American military personnel. Camp medical records indicate that common health issues included respiratory infections, dental problems, work-related injuries, and conditions resulting from previous combat wounds. Mortality rates in the camps remained low, with deaths resulting primarily from pre-existing conditions or accidents rather than neglect or mistreatment. The work program represented the most significant aspect of daily life for enlisted prisoners. American authorities assigned prisoners to labor details that supported the war effort while complying with Geneva Convention prohibitions against directly military work. Agricultural labor predominated, with prisoners working in cotton fields, harvesting vegetables, cutting timber, and processing crops. Other common assignments included construction projects on military bases, road maintenance, and food processing facilities. Prisoners received small payments for their work, typically 80 cents per day, in canteen coupons that could be used to purchase toiletries, tobacco, and other approved items. Supervision of work details varied by location and project type. American guards accompanied prisoners to work sites and maintained security, but generally did not involve themselves in task management unless security concerns arose. Civilian employers who contracted for prisoner labor often communicated directly with prisoner work leaders regarding daily assignments and productivity expectations. Farmers in particular developed working relationships with regular prisoner crews, and some accounts describe arrangements where prisoners worked with minimal direct supervision once routines were established. Relations between prisoners and American guards reflected the professional military atmosphere that characterized most camps. Guards enforced regulations regarding conduct, movement, and security procedures, but generally maintained a correct rather than hostile stance. Physical mistreatment remained exceptional rather than routine. Prisoners who violated camp rules faced disciplinary measures ranging from loss of privileges to confinement in camp stockades, with punishments documented and subject to review by camp commanders and International Red Cross inspectors. Officers confined to the camps without work obligations organized their time differently than enlisted men. They established educational courses, language classes, and discussion groups. Some camps permitted officers to organize musical ensembles or theatrical productions. Reading materials provided through camp libraries and Red Cross shipments offered another common activity. Officers also maintained military discipline among prisoner populations, operating internal command structures that American authorities recognized for purposes of camp administration. This arrangement allowed German officers to handle many routine matters of prisoner conduct and organization without American intervention. Interactions between prisoners and American civilians occurred primarily in work settings and during authorized activities. Prisoners working on farms or in small towns sometimes conversed with civilians despite language barriers. These exchanges typically remained brief and focused on work tasks. Some civilians expressed curiosity about the prisoners, while others maintained distance. Incidents of hostility were reported, but did not represent the general pattern. Camp regulations prohibited fraternization, but practical enforcement varied, depending on circumstances and locations. Religious services operated regularly in most camps. Catholic and Protestant chaplains visited camps to conduct services for prisoners of those faiths. Camp authorities provided space for worship and permitted prisoners to organize religious activities. German military chaplains, who were themselves prisoners, often led services and provided pastoral care to fellow prisoners. Religious observance provided structure and continuity for men separated from their homes and uncertain about their futures. Mail represented the most important connection between prisoners and families in Germany. Camp postal systems operated under international postal agreements that permitted prisoners to send and receive correspondence subject to censorship review. Outgoing letters were limited in length and frequency, typically 2 letters and 4 postcards per month. American censors examined all mail for security-relevant information before forwarding it through neutral countries to Germany. Incoming mail followed similar procedures. Delivery remained irregular, with letters sometimes taking 3 to 6 months to reach recipients. The uncertainty of whether family members had survived Allied bombing campaigns created ongoing anxiety that mail delivery could either relieve or worsen. Recreation facilities varied by camp size and location. Most camps provided athletic fields where prisoners played soccer, the sport most familiar to German soldiers. Volleyball courts, boxing areas, and spaces for track and field events supplemented organized sports. Camps also established libraries stocked with German-language books obtained through the YMCA and Red Cross. Some camps built theaters where prisoners staged plays and musical performances. Craft workshops allowed prisoners to create items for personal use or to send home. These activities filled non-working hours and maintained morale during lengthy confinements. The arrival of prisoners captured in a European theater after D-Day in June 1944 expanded camp populations significantly. Unlike the Afrika Korps veterans who had been captured in 1943, many of these new arrivals had fought on the Western Front and included both Wehrmacht regulars and Waffen-SS personnel. The War Department maintained policies separating known Nazi Party members and SS personnel from general prisoner populations to prevent intimidation and political conflicts within camps. Special compounds held these segregated prisoners under closer supervision. Political tensions within prisoner populations manifested in various ways. Ardent National Socialists among the prisoners attempted to maintain party discipline and ideology. They organized cells within barracks, pressured other prisoners to maintain solidarity, and sometimes threatened those who appeared too cooperative with American authorities. Camp administrators responded by transferring identified troublemakers to designated camps that held confirmed Nazi activists. This segregation reduced, but did not eliminate political conflicts. American intelligence officers interviewed prisoners to identify attitudes and gather information about conditions in Germany and German military matters. As the war in Europe progressed toward Germany's eventual surrender, prisoners received news through authorized German-language newspapers published under American oversight and through official announcements. The newspapers reported war news from Allied perspectives, which many prisoners initially distrusted. However, the consistent pattern of German retreats and territorial losses gradually impressed itself upon prisoner consciousness. Radio broadcasts of official news, presented in German, supplemented printed information. Prisoners learned of Germany's surrender in May 1945 through camp announcements. Reactions varied from relief to despair, with some prisoners expressing concern about conditions in occupied Germany and others feeling freed from military obligations. The period following German surrender created uncertainty about repatriation timing. International agreements required returning prisoners to their home countries once hostilities ceased, but practical considerations delayed immediate implementation. The United States needed to arrange shipping, coordinate with occupation authorities in Germany, and process hundreds of thousands of prisoners. During this interim period, camp routines continued largely unchanged. Work programs proceeded as prisoners remained a valuable labor source, particularly for agricultural work. Camp authorities provided increased information about conditions in Germany and about occupation policies that would govern their return. Repatriation began in early 1946 and proceeded in phases determined by logistical capacity and priority categories. Prisoners with agricultural skills were sometimes retained longer to assist with spring planting before returning home. Others departed camps in large groups bound for ports where Liberty ships and transport vessels waited. The journey back to Europe reversed the route prisoners had taken years earlier. Ships docked at French ports or at Bremerhaven in the American occupation zone. From these ports, prisoners moved to processing centers where they received discharge documentation and guidance about travel to their home regions. Prisoners returning to Germany encountered a drastically changed homeland. Cities showed extensive bomb damage. Food remained rationed more severely than in American camps, and occupation authorities governed daily life. The contrast between the material conditions prisoners had experienced in the United States and the scarcity they found in Germany struck many returnees forcefully. Letters and memoirs written after repatriation frequently compare the abundance of American camps with post-war German conditions. Some former prisoners express surprise at having been treated according to international law when German camps had often failed to provide similar standards for Allied prisoners. The American POW camp system had processed approximately 375,000 German prisoners between 1943 and 1946. The camps had operated in 46 states with varying degrees of efficiency and consistency. While individual incidents of mistreatment occurred and some camps functioned better than others, the overall pattern reflected systematic compliance with Geneva Convention requirements. The experience provided German soldiers with direct observation of American society, resources, and attitudes during a period when their own country's propaganda had insisted on American weakness and decadence. The documentation produced by the POW camp system included thousands of pages of administrative records, inspection reports, prisoner correspondence, and photographs. These materials recorded the daily operations of a massive detention system that had functioned as a side theater of a larger war. Camp newspapers published by prisoners, official reports compiled by camp commanders, and the letters prisoners sent home created a detailed archive of the prisoner experience. International Red Cross inspectors visited camps regularly throughout the war years, and their reports provided independent assessments of conditions and compliance with international law. Former prisoners who later wrote memoirs or gave interviews described their time in American camps as unexpected. Most had anticipated harsh treatment based on propaganda and on Germany's own treatment of Soviet prisoners. Instead, they encountered correctness, sufficient food, medical care, and boredom rather than brutality. This disconnect between expectation and reality influenced how many former prisoners viewed the United States in post-war years. The memory of adequate treatment during captivity contrasted with their direct knowledge of conditions in German-operated camps, particularly those holding Soviet and Polish prisoners. The final camps closed in mid-1946 after the last repatriation ships departed American ports. The War Department dismantled the temporary structures, and the sites returned to agricultural use, military reservations, or other purposes. The prisoner war program had contributed significantly to American agricultural production during years when farm labor shortages had threatened harvests. The system had also demonstrated that large-scale detention of enemy prisoners could be managed according to international law, even while total war consumed resources and attention. The 3 years of German POW presence in the United States had passed as a largely invisible chapter of the war for most Americans, But for the hundreds of thousands of German soldiers who experienced it, the months or years spent in camps scattered across unfamiliar American territory remained a defining wartime memory.